Yesterday, a story was published by ESPN that said Luminosity, the current reigning major champions in CSGO, had their players signed to SK Gaming, the organization which currently has a Danish team who finished second at Gfinity CEVO Season 9 Finals. That the players had signed with SK Gaming, but then after signing, they had backed out of the deal and decided they wanted to stay with Luminosity. And so on Friday this week, SK threatened litigation against the players and Luminosity, and as a result, the story added in a detail that perhaps SK was themselves in danger of being removed from E-League, since E-League had some wording in there about torturous interference, which is the American terminology for poaching, which mainly only exists in most North American leagues. Now, one of the things about this article by ESPN is that it only gave Luminosity's side of things, except for some of the emails. It mentioned that it had emails between Luminosity and SK where they'd had negotiations backwards and forwards that led to the players from Luminosity signing the contracts with SK. So one of the things that this article did quite poorly, I thought, was the timeline of when it happened. It was all over the place, and it didn't always list exact dates. Like, for example, it didn't list a date of when the contract was signed, but when I found out the date, and then I go, look, there is a part where it says something along the lines of Fallen saying something like something happened 3 days before the major, but it doesn't explicitly state that this was all signed then. So one of the first things I did was, since that article is essentially Luminosity's side of things, Luminosity has quotes in there from Fallen, from the owner of Luminosity, but there's nothing from SK. I reached out to SK and I asked them some questions along these lines, like fill in some of these blanks, answer these questions for me. And I'll say up front at the beginning of this video, just because if this detail comes out, people will think it's suspicious if I didn't mention it. I used to work for SK. I worked at SK as their editor-in-chief from, I think it was September 2009 until May of 2012. And at that point, after that, I haven't worked with them since. Now, under normal circumstances, people should probably take that into consideration in terms of what I'm going to say, because a lot of people in esports are quite biased and do maintain those old relationships, etc. But actually, when I worked at SK, I didn't like the way a lot of things were done there. It wasn't one of the better periods of my career in terms of enjoying my career there. I had a lot of conflicts in terms of differing opinions on how things should be done and thoughts on the way things were executed there. And that's one of the reasons I left. And that's one of the reasons why ever since then, I've enjoyed the rest of my career in a different way than I was able to while I was at SK. So I say that up front, just because if people want to think I'm biased, they're certainly welcome to, and there's the information to think so. But I reached out to SK because I noticed they didn't have any stay in this statement. Now, it says at the end that they ignored any request for statement. But I've reached out and I've got some more information. So the first thing I can do using the SK's information and what was mentioned in this ESPN article is we're going to lay out a timeline of what happened before we look at the details of what happened. So, on the 28th of July, 2015, Luminosity signed the core of the players that are in this team now, which were the players that previously represented Keyed Stars. And so the players that you will now know that still remain in this lineup now were obviously Fallen, the in-game leader, coldzera, the star player, and Fur, the former star player of the team. On the 23rd of November that year, so 4 months later, just under 4 months later, FNX and Taco came over with Zeus, the coach, from Games Academy, and out went Steel and Bolts. And then the lineup, as a result, was switched up so that it was the 5 players you think of now. 6 days later than FNX and Taco joining, Luminosity finished second place at Faceit Stage 3 finals held at DreamHack Winter, where they were able to win best of 3 series over Envious, current reigning major champions at the time, NIP, still a top 10 team, TSM, considered a top 2, top 3 team in the world. And in the final, they lost to Fnatic, and that was the first tournament in Fnatic's streak with their brand new lineup of winning 6 tournaments in a row. So that was obviously a huge surprise. If you remember, that was the tournament they began going 0-16 on Dust 2 against Fnatic. And then they shocked everyone because they'd only had 2 days since they've changed the players. I mean, it's a little bit longer there. No, it was 2 days because that's at the end of the tournament. I'm talking about the 29th. So at the time, they'd never had a placing on that level. Before that, their best placings were like making the quarterfinals of a major and then just going out immediately to whichever team they played there. So 29th of November is when they have their first real big result, like a world elite level result. On the 12th of December, so half a month later, They finished 5th to 6th at ESL ESEA Pro League Season 2 finals. So after their great performance at Face It, they didn't have such a good performance at ESL ESEA Pro League finals. And the reason why we bring up this timeline with results is that it was in December that the ESPN article says that the team signed their letters of intent for a 2-year term with Luminosity. Now, presumably, 2-year term letter of intent means at some point during the rest of the term of their contracts, they were going to be presented with contracts that would last 2 years starting from that point. It's not that the 2 years doesn't start from December when they got the letters of intent. It's from whenever the contract is presented. That doesn't have to necessarily be at the end of their existing contract, which was going to run out on, I think it was the last day of June. It was going to be July 1st that any new contract would run from. In theory, it's just whenever you can obviously sign a new contract while you're under an existing contract and just re-up early. So in this scenario, here's the key point to understand is that Luminosity gives them letters of intent in December. Now then, ESPN then says that they got emails which outline a lengthy back and forward process between the parties since February, parties being SK Gaming and the Luminosity players, ultimately culminating in the players signing contracts with the SK Gaming organization, which go into effect July 1st. So keep track of the timeline there. They got the letters of intent in December, but in February is when they started negotiating with SK, the players, not the organization, to leave the organization after their contract ended and sign with SK in the next period of their time. So we're talking about 1 or 2 months at least, depending on the time in December when they got the letters of intent. Now, once the team had signed... once the team... had been talking to SK about this stuff. SK hears about the letters of intent. They take the letters of intent, which was from Luminosity org to re-sign the Luminosity ECS team for 2 years, to lawyers in both Germany and Britain, in terms of German and British law offices. And those lawyers determined that these letters of intent are not like ironclad. Like, the letter of intent is not the same as a contract. It's an intent that you plan to sign a contract at some point in the future. And so you're both stating that, and then you can make a plan from there. And if it's very well worded, it can be very similar to a contract, but it's not the same. So the lawyers look at these and they actually say, you know what, there's ways out of these. Like, this isn't ironclad. They can certainly sign otherwise. And so, we're going to uphold that aspect, and you can go ahead and sign them if you want. So SK promises Luminosity, if they sign, they'll give them legal representation, they'll give them additional compensation, and they'll give them legal counsel. Now, SK's offer to the players was that they would get $9,000 in monthly allowances for the team house, for flights to Brazil to see family members. They could choose where they live and practice, doesn't have to be in Europe necessarily. And they also promised to protect the Luminosity players from the Luminosity organization. Now, the Luminosity players decided to sign in March, and afterwards, they signed in March on March 26th, which was 3 days before MLG Columbus, the major began. They played the major, they won the major. After the major, there's one extra detail. So they played the major, they won the major. After they'd signed, SK say that they reached out to the Luminosity organization and they tried to contact them, and that they wouldn't, tried to work out like a buyout to even get them earlier than that. Now, here's the details, okay? So after the major, it's even said by Fallen that the team rethought things and they decided to go back on it, and that they want to stay with Luminosity and they weren't going to go with SK, and they claim that SK pressured them into it, and as a result, they claim that they're not going to be with SK now, and that's why SK is threatening the litigation. So I'll put the timeline out for you there. So now we're going to go back in time and look at some of these details, okay? So we're going to go back in time to the point where the players get the letters of intent in December. Because here's the interesting detail that SK told me. Alex Muller, the managing director of SK, he told me, I'll quote it, Luminosity Gaming signed letters of intent with the players in December with the obligation to follow up with proper contracts within 2 weeks, months after the players had yet to receive said contracts, and faced a situation in which the organization had allegedly broken the letter of intent on multiple occasions. The players asked for advice, A number of law firms were consulted, all of which agreed that the letter of intent was unbinding, and the players ultimately decided to go ahead and sign the contracts with SK for the time after the current contracts expire. So remember that. They only signed with SK on March 26th. The letter of intent was in December, and the letter of intent supposedly contained a detail that they would get contracts within 2 weeks, which they never got from Luminosity. They still hadn't gotten the contracts in February when SK began talking to Luminosity's players about this, and the Luminosity players, presumably by asking for advice, actually went out there looking for other orgs potentially, because the org that they've got right now isn't serving them, isn't giving them new contracts so they can re-up. They sign contracts with SK after they find the letters of intent aren't binding because Luminosity's org allegedly has broken the letter of intent by not giving the contracts, and in other areas has broken it as well. But they win the MLG, and then whatever happens at that point in time, it's one of those scenarios that no one will ever know what happened in that room. Did the Luminosity owner come and give them a better offer? Did he blackmail them? Did they just feel guilt because they just won the major on the Luminosity banner, and now they've realized they've signed somewhere else, but now they've still got a few months left in this contract, and maybe we can get out of it somehow? So here's some more details. I asked Alex about the contracts, and he says the contracts between SK Gaming and the team, here's the detail: 5 players, coach, and team manager. So not just Fallen, not just one person, also a coach, also a team manager, were signed March 26, 2016, i.e. the weekend before MLG Columbus started. We had been in discussions with the team for a long while, and accepted their invitation to meet everyone and discuss next steps in Los Angeles shortly before. So it wasn't just that they were emailing and then they decided, I don't want this actually, I've accidentally signed. No, they actually gave an invitation to SK Gaming's organization to fly out to LA, where the team's staying, and meet the players to discuss this before they made these contracts and signed them. Now then, after they signed the contracts with SK says this about reaching out. We attempted to reach out to the organization shortly after to explore a potential early buyout of their current contracts at the desire of the players. So the players didn't want to just wait until July 1st to become players of SK. They wanted to just get out of Luminosity right then. And so they wanted actually SK to potentially give a buyout to their Luminosity org and get them out early. So they'd immediately become SK players. Back to the quote. But unfortunately, multiple attempts to get into negotiations with the LG organization have been ignored. Now, here's where Fallen is quoted in the ESPN piece. He says that they were pressured to sign. He says, SK was pushing us to sign a contract with them when we were not comfortable with the whole situation. Now, remember, they've asked SK to fly out. They asked SK for legal advice on this. They've told SK that the letters of intent haven't been upheld in terms of getting their contract. They've signed with SK. All 5 players have signed. The coach has signed. The team manager has signed. They've got all this excellent deal from SK, but apparently they weren't comfortable with it and they didn't want it, and SK pushed them to sign it. He then says that happened 3 days before the major. Now, here's what's great. This next sentence here is very telling. It says, at that time, all we wanted is to be clear of those organizations' problems and focus on winning the major. After achieving that, we discussed internally and with lawyers about the situation. We also realized that we wanted to stay, building the history we have been building this entire year with LG. We have been growing so fast lately, both team and organization, and we feel proud to be part of it. That's why we wanted to stay where we feel comfortable. Now, SK, when I asked them, Fallen says he was pressured. What do you have to say about that? Alex Muller says, importantly, we did not pressure anyone into anything. Instead, the players asked to have the situation resolved as quickly as possible, preferably before heading to Columbus, and wanted to put the contracts in place sooner rather than later. Because remember, the contract doesn't run out until the end of June, so they can sign any time up till then for the afterwards, and they're going to wait after that if they want to as well. But remember, the players haven't got the contracts they were promised. Luminosity hasn't upheld their side of the contract, and as a result, they want their contract as soon as possible. They want to, like Fallen says, they want to let me see what the line is. At that time, all we wanted is to be clear of those organizations' problems. Whose problems, mate? I mean, if you love Luminosity and you built such great things, then why is that? Why have they got problems that you're not mentioning? You don't mention the problems here. You don't mention that they didn't give you the contracts and that the letters of intent said they should have. You don't bring that up, do you? Interesting how certain things are omitted here, depending on what's beneficial, expedient to the people saying the things. Now, here's what's interesting. I think it's very, very interesting that at no point in this whole article is it mentioned or even explored by the journalist, by the way, as to why Luminosity, the team of players, the 5 players, the coach and the manager, didn't inform Luminosity, the organisation, that they were looking for other offers, that they were talking to other teams. Why did they never mention that? Huh? Why would, if they liked that org so much, why didn't they mention it? Because obviously if it's a great org, you tell them, oh, this team's going to be offering me this. Do you have a counter offer? Would you like to offer me more? I want to stay in this org and keep building it, so can you give me a different offer? Maybe not as much money, but a good offer in itself, and that builds towards something. Maybe I get equity money, whatever it might be. No, they don't mention it to Luminosity themselves until after they've signed with SK and then won the major 3 days later. That's a key detail there, because it's very suspicious that the Luminosity players don't tell their org at that point in time. He even mentions organisational problems. He never mentions what they were. He's not honest on that respect. Also, they wanted to sign with SK quickly, yet they love Luminosity's org. They think it's awesome. Interestingly enough, they only changed their mind after winning the major, after winning the biggest tournament in the world for $500,000, the biggest prize money ever in CSGO history, which, remember, would go to the Luminosity org first and then be paid to the players based on what I know about how prize money is paid out in esports. So that org can now hold that 500k over you, and maybe they can even fuck with you in court and say, come to court if you want to get that money from me. Who knows? And then they put that line. After winning the major, all of a sudden, magically, they realized they wanted to stay building the history we have been building this entire year with LG. What? But you didn't want to build that history before. 3 days before you won the major, you didn't want to build that history. You signed a contract with someone else, right? A contract which apparently they're saying you want it signed quicker. Same org that you're proud of, that you love the history of, you don't even tell them that you've got a deal going. You don't even give them a chance to give a counter offer. You go and you sign contracts, 7 people with a totally different org. Now here's some more interesting parts. In this detail, remember in the ESPN article, which worked with Luminosity, it even has this detail that says that SK offered the Luminosity players protection from the Luminosity org. Remember, the Luminosity players supposedly love this org and are proud of what they built with them and are glad that they want to stay and build the history. Why would they need protection from that org? The same org, remember, they didn't want to tell that they were going to sign elsewhere. Weird. Almost seems like they don't want that. So here's the quote that Alex tells me when I asked them, why would they need Luminosity? Why would Luminosity need protection from their org? He says, throughout our discussions with the team, the players voiced the fear of the LG organization withholding outstanding salaries and prize money once they told them that they would not renew their contracts, which is why we guaranteed in writing that we would front any outstanding payments, as in they'll pay whatever prize money they haven't paid you, and cover any legal counsel going forwards, presumably to get money back. Because obviously here's the big problem. If Luminosity does say, well, we're not going to give you your share of the 500k because you've already signed contract, or whatever it might be, then you get into a difficulty. And the problem in esports is people don't like to go to court and spend years battling to get that 500k back. So if you ask me, read between the lines, I think LG owner gets to hold the 500k over him, and he tells them, you don't sign with them, we're going to stay together, and now that I've got the money, I'm going to give you these contracts, I'm going to give you great contracts, and we're all going to be a happy family again. Sign the fucking contract. You know, you all love me, don't you? Come on, boys, give me a hug. I mean, here's a great detail, okay? So here's what the Luminosity owner said about this. He says in the ESPN article, to this day, I've yet to receive an email from Alex. Pause. Remember, Alex says that he reached out to this guy. He said, we reached out to the organization shortly after to explore a potential early buyout. And then he says, of the current contracts, the desire of the players, but unfortunately, multiple attempts to get into negotiations with the LG organization have been ignored. Now, the Luminosity guy doesn't deny that in his comment. He says, to this day, I've yet to receive an email. What if it was a phone call? What if it was a Skype message? Interesting that. He's only said that he's yet to receive an email, but he's painted it. So if you don't think about this, you'll think that he's had no communication with Alex and that they've just done this all behind their backs. He then says, continuing what the Luminosity owner says, he continued to proposition, bribe, manipulate, and con my players. Stop right there again. So proposition, yes, he offered them a contract where you hadn't, and he offered them a contract after your contract runs out. You don't have a contract in place for after that. You give them a letter of intent and then you haven't given contracts, allegedly, based on the information I have. He bribed them, did he? Did he bribe them in as much as he said he would pay any outstanding payments if you signed it with him? Or he'd offer extra things in that sense? Is that bribing? He manipulated them. How did he manipulate you exactly? I mean, when you say that, in fact, there's a little bit, I'll get to that in a second, and cons your players. And I don't know how he's conning them. What is he telling them that's false in this particular sense? And then he puts this line, of whom only a few speak English, and did so with no legal representation. He never once informed me that he was doing this behind my back or was even speaking to my players. He manipulated my players into thinking LG was the devil and coached them on how to break their contracts with false information and lies, all the while telling them he would protect them if LG took legal action by paying for any legal fees. He even went so far as to personally write the communications to Luminosity, me, for the players. Now here's a few great details where you'll see where my skillful reading between the lines wrecks someone. So first of all, that line there, he manipulated my players into thinking LG was the devil. Oh really, how did he do that then? A bunch of grown-up adults like Fallen and the manager and the coach. How did he manipulate these guys who've been in esports for like 10 years into thinking LG was the devil? Manipulate them. What, fucking advanced hypnosis? Was he some sort of Svengali who, look into my eyes, you will know that LG is the devil. Back in the room. Do you want to sign? Well, yes, I wouldn't want to live in hell with the devil. Like, no. Months of discussions in which they seem to be put forwards a lot of claims that they didn't like things in your org, and for even Fallen even says that there were organisational problems. At which point they say, please come out to LA and meet us. Then they say, could we have the contracts earlier? Then they sign the contracts before the major. All of this. And then he's manipulating them to do this. How does he manipulate someone when he's not there, by the way? Like before that, when they're emailing him, what does this guy have? Like the biggest gun in the world that can point all the way from Cologne, Germany over to fucking LA in America and go, you signed a fucking contract, so I'll give you what for, mister. I don't think so. Then that whole line that he says there, of whom only a few speak English, bullshit. First of all, the head people who make the choices in that team, the coach, the manager, Fallen, these are smart guys. These are guys who've been around esports. These are guys who know what's best for the players. And these guys speak English. Fallen particularly speaks good English. Zeus, I know, speaks good English. It's not like these guys, I know speaker the English. Please slow little English. They're not even vaguely like that. They can just hold a full conversation with you. You've seen them writing whole texts online. They've done whole interviews in English. They can certainly understand the basics of a contract being put before them. I mean, they apparently understood the basics of letters of intent being all fucked up with not getting their contracts. That's why they start shopping deals around. They can certainly understand the concept of leaving your org for more money and then signing elsewhere. I mean, what are you trying to make out? Like, to them, it was just like being passed a piece of fucking papyrus with Egyptian hieroglyphics on. And they were like, oh, who is this SK guy? Am I signing a fan? Am I signing an autograph for a fan here? What, in 4 places and put my signature and also initials and date as well? Oh, a very weird signature I have to do for that. I don't read the English, so these are all like, this is like Chinese or hieroglyphics to me. No, they understand fucking English, mate. They understand the basics. Now, do they understand all the legal aspects? I would suggest maybe they don't, which is maybe how you thought you'd got them with the letters of intent, right? Now let's add in another detail. So he says that few of his players speak English in that particular sense. Yet then he's mad that Alex helped them write their communications to Luminosity, expressing explicitly that they don't want to be in Luminosity anymore and that they're going to go with SK. Because he knows that maybe all of them don't have perfect written English. So he's helping them with that to make sure it's entirely what they want to express and that it's not a scenario where they mess up a word and now they can get fucked by you. Also, notice that detail there, which he himself mentions, which the guy who wrote the news post didn't mention, and which is very key for someone like Fallen, which is that after the contracts are signed, there is communication from Luminosity's players to Luminosity, presumably saying, I am leaving your org, I have signed with SK, a deal will go into effect July 1st, you did not give me this thing in the letter of intent, therefore I consider it void. Now, it wasn't just that they were forced to sign. Now Luminosity's players are sending emails that the guy from SK has helped them write so that it's entirely correct. Why do they want that done if they're being pressured and it was such a bad decision? Interesting how this shit works, isn't it? Then we've got this quote from him. The entire situation is extremely disheartening that a group of authoritative figures that we trust as owners and players would try to steal something the players and I have built from the ground up, Maida said in a statement. As of now, the team, by their own decision, is staying in LG and honouring their pre-existing contracts. We hope to continue to build our legacy in peace. First things first. So the part where he says that this group of authoritative figures tried to steal something the players and him had built up from the ground up. Now, first of all, what were they stealing? They were offering them a contract when your contract ends. What are they stealing? Once your contract ends, you do not own those players. You did not invest into those players. That is a false terminology. I invested in those players. No, because when you invest into something, you own a percentage of it. You own the right. You own nothing. You have paid them work for hire for the time period that your contract runs. The day your contract ends, you have no ownership over them whatsoever. They owe you nothing. You have not had anything stolen. They were agreeing to sign after the fact. So that in itself shows you how he's trying to play the victim card, and he's trying to use bullshit terminology himself to play on your feelings, to feel like you're stealing something out from under him. If you guys built this together, why didn't you give them new contracts? Why didn't you follow up on your own letter of intent months before SK could have got in there, and you could have had these players signed for 2 years, which, by the way, would have been a steal for you. They'd have been idiots to sign for 2 years at that point in time where CSGO is going. Then there's the quote that says that as of now, the team, by their own decision, is staying with LG and honouring their pre-existing contracts. By the way, when were they ever not honouring their pre-existing contracts? They were planning to finish their contracts, then they were going to go with SK. Now, in the middle, they wanted to see if SK could then go and check, can we end our contracts early? Remember, they wanted to end their contracts early with you, this awesome org that they love so much, even though they could have just filled out their contract with you if they loved you so much, then signed with SK for the great deal. So they wanted to not only not tell you about the deal, they didn't want your input on it whatsoever. They then asked SK, oh, please come on, meet us soon. Oh, then please give us the contracts as soon as possible. They signed them immediately. They were like, oh, write this communication to Luminosity. Oh, we need protection from them, though. We need protection from Luminosity. Oh, we need legal counsel. They're going to fuck us up and take our prize money. And yet all of this, you loved them the whole time. And it was just like oh, listen, baby, man. Listen, it's not, she means nothing to me, man. It was just a one-time thing. Like, I was thinking about you the whole time, baby. Yeah. Like, yeah, who believes this? Who believes Fallen? Like, it wasn't me. But I saw you with the contracts. It wasn't me. And then you got a legal representative involved. It wasn't me. What is going on here? So here's the thing. SK was going to start their contract after Luminosity's contract ends. He didn't deliver on the letters of intent, apparently. And where was his contract offer? Where was his, if he cares so much about the org? Now, let's be real before we go on. Luminosity, the organization, are the luckiest fucking organization in the history of CSGO. Because they lucked into getting the best team in the world, but they got them, like, 8 months earlier. When realistically, Luminosity, the org, remember, they used to sponsor the people who became Winterfox. They should be an org that, in terms of the money they can offer and their exposure level and their sponsors, should be around the level of NRG. I mean, unfortunately, when I say some of these other names, Optic, TSM, I mean, they're obviously much better orgs than Luminosity, but they're the level of where their team is in CSGO now. Instead, they got this they got this team that was good, with a lot of promise. Then the team made 2 changes and then became one of the best teams in the world, and now is the best team in the world and won the major. Now, here's what's interesting. I don't think Luminosity, the org, during that period of time, could offer a good enough contract to match SK's offer. There were already rumours behind the scenes that FaZe was going to get the Luminosity team. Now, what happened was SK came along, offered an incredible deal, including all the stuff to have your family fly out and all that shit. Offered the world. The team accepted. Even asked SK to try and get them out earlier than just after their current contracts ended. Then had a change of heart, but too late. You'd signed the contract at that point in time. So now we come to a final detail, which is the involvement of Ralph Reichart, managing director of ESL, and Pietro Franguelli, the independent commissioner of WESA, the World Esports Association, who at the time was an SK lawyer in this deal early on. And Ralph Reichart is someone who, at one point in time, had owned shares in SK, which apparently he's either sold or is going to sell now. So I asked Alex about this, the involvement of these, because the Maida guy puts a lot of emphasis on the fact these two guys are involved to try and make it sound like some kind of Wesser thing where they're fucking with them, or there's extra stuff going on in the German scene to make it happen. Now, here's what's interesting. I asked Alex, he says, Ralph Reichart, as you know, he is the CEO of Turtle Entertainment and the shareholder of SK Gaming. Because Ralph Reichart, if you don't know, founded SK Gaming way back. He has, however, not been involved in the day-to-day business for years and has been looking to sell his interest for a while now, which was publicly announced not too long ago. He did not know about the situation until after the contracts were signed and has not taken action for either side. If anything, he asked both sides to sit down together and find an amicable solution. Now, in terms of Pietro Franguelli, we consulted Pietro Franguelli early on, i.e. immediately after we were told that the players would want to continue with LG without stating any reason, and ceased all direct communications with us. He has helped us facilitate the talks with the players and stepped back after this was done for our lawyer to take over. As you know, SK is not a member of WESA. Interesting point to note, right? Because people think this is a WESA thing. SK is not a member of WESA, and neither is Luminosity. As such, it has not been actively involved in this process. WESA, that is. When asked, we shared our point of view and answered questions to a number of members to provide transparency and help resolve this matter professionally, though, members of WESA. In general, none of the above-mentioned parties had knowledge or any part in our negotiations with the players, which, by the way, there's been no proof provided for them having done so. They were consulted and or found out about this only after the dispute between SK and LG escalated. Now, I will say, when you consider Pietro Frangulli is now the independent commissioner of WESA, Ralph Reichert's an executive board member of WESA, put forward by ESL, and managing director of ESL, and shareholder of SK, and former founder of SK. I'll just say this, even though I'm not putting any of those people at blame, man alive, the German esports scene is so incestuous, it puts the fucking Lannisters and the Targaryens to shame. Man alive, guys. If you don't want to people think there's any Illuminati shit going on, I'd sort your act out, seriously. Anyway, there's one last detail to discuss here, which is the topic that was very early on in the ESPN piece. Will E-League be involved? Because it said E-League, while declining to go into specifics, told ESPN that there's a process for this kinds of situations. And it says, team owners may file a formal complaint with E-League to raise issues of tortious interference, poaching, or many other actions that may be deemed damaging to E-League, league officials told ESPN. Matters of discipline against teams or players are handled at the sole discretion of the E-League commissioner. So first of all, on the surface, especially to Americans who have all these rules of tortious interference and poaching within their leagues, where you can't talk to a player before his contract runs out, and that's considered something really bad, which doesn't necessarily exist in other areas of life. Because they have all those rules there, a lot of people are going to think, oh, right, and if it's at the sole discretion of the E-League commissioner, oh, SK is in a lot of trouble, like maybe they get kicked out of E-League, maybe the Luminosity players can't compete if they're forced to go to SK. Here's one little detail that's interesting. The E-League commissioner is someone called Minsik Ko, and his in-gamer alias was Rice. And here's an interesting detail for you. He was an employee of SK Gaming from July 2007. On his LinkedIn, it says until October 2013, 6 years, 4 months as a manager of, started out managing the Warcraft 3 team, then the StarCraft 2 team, then the CSGO team by the end. Although on a news post I found about him leaving, it said he left on the 31st of December. But basically, middle of 2007 until end of 2013, he was a manager there. Now, again, if you consider the whole thing of like how incestuous the German esports scene is, you'd have to imagine he might rule if... Remember, it's his sole discretion. No one else votes on it. He, in theory, could just let SK off with this and say, I don't consider this tortious interference. I don't consider this poaching. And let them out in that sense. So I don't know whether he will, but it's certainly interesting. That's why I also brought up the fact I worked for SK at one point in time, because people think a similar thing about me, that we just act in this particular manner. So I think a lot of it's very interesting. Like, the key detail you noticed is it's not just that I've put together the SK side with the Luminosity side, it's that the Luminosity side is full of all these holes and areas where if you read between the lines, you find that they didn't lie, like they say, for example, that he didn't contact me by email, but they don't mention that he might try to contact you a different way. Meanwhile, the SK side, for whatever you think about it, whether you believe it, comes with a lot more hard facts, comes with a lot more details, and a lot less interpretation of facts. It just gives you the facts, and you decide for yourself what to make off that. Now, as a result, it sounds to me like a fairly open and shut case. Luminosity Org didn't do right by their players. The players were getting to a high level where they were doing a lot. There's a big major coming up, the $1 million major. So as a result, they want to go somewhere else. But they're worried if they do that Luminosity, this org that hasn't been a big org in esports, will just hold the prize money from, for example, DreamHack Winter, ESL Pro League, StarLadder. Maybe they'll just hold that money, DreamHack Open. They might hold that money back from them and say, I'm not going to pay this. I'm not going to pay you the salaries that I owe you. Outstanding salaries. Maybe they hadn't been paid salary for a little while. Who knows? And as a result, they not only want to sign with SK for the better deal, but they want protection against Luminosity. Now, for whatever reason, after the major, they have this magical change of heart. And suddenly they love Luminosity Organ again. And suddenly they love this Maida guy. And suddenly they don't mention details themselves that would be pertinent to the case. Like they omit the part of what their organizational problems were. Oh, why were you ever talking to SK in the first place? They make it sound like SK came up to him in an alley with a gun and said, sign this fucking contract. No, I'll put you to the ground like a dog. And instead, they'd had months of emails back and forwards. They invited SK out to LA to talk to them. They then said, could we have the contract sooner? They signed the contract. They allowed SK to write letters for them. They had SK checking on legal stuff for them. They had SK providing protection from them. And then after all, they turn around and they say SK is the bad guy. And they let this Maida guy, the owner, just say like, oh, he manipulated my players with his voodoo magic and his big English words that they don't understand. They're already from Brazil, you know, mate. Unreal, isn't it? What a clusterfuck this whole story is.